The morning air in Atlanta was crisp, the city already humming with the promise of a new day. Inside Umoja Bank, the polished glass doors swung open, and a woman stepped in, her presence commanding, her reputation legendary. Thandiwe Mckay's CEO and founder, had built this institution from the ground up. She was the reason Umoja existed, the architect of its mission to serve those too often overlooked. Yet, in a matter of seconds, the world inside that branch shifted. At the counter, a teller's eyes flickered with uncertainty, then hardened. "I'm sorry, I'll need more documentation before I can process your withdrawal." The words hung in the air, sharp and cold. Thandiwe, the very leader whose vision shaped every policy, was being denied access to her own account. Not for lack of credentials, not for any error on her part, but for reasons that had nothing to do with banking and everything to do with perception. Have you ever walked into a place you helped build, only to be treated like a stranger? Have you ever felt your achievements questioned, your identity doubted, simply because of how you look or where you come from? Maybe you've watched someone you respect face the same silent barriers, doors that should open, but don't. In that moment, Thandiwe wasn't just a CEO. She was every person who's ever been told, without words, you don't belong here. How many times have you been underestimated before you even spoke a word? This wasn't just a banking error. It was a reflection of something deeper, a pattern that repeats itself in boardrooms, classrooms, and everyday life. Bias doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it whispers in the form of extra questions, unnecessary hurdles, or a refusal to see someone's worth. Even at the highest levels, respect can be withheld, dignity can be challenged, and authority can be ignored. Thandiwe's experience is a reminder that no title, no amount of success, can shield you from the sting of being dismissed. But what if one moment of injustice could spark a chain reaction? What if, in just 7 minutes, a single decision could flip the script, not just for Thandiwe, but for everyone watching? Stay with me, because what happened next sent shockwaves through the entire bank and far beyond. Have you ever been judged before anyone knew your story? Share your experience in the comments. Your voice matters here. Thandiwe's day began before sunrise, as it often did. She sat at her kitchen table, sipping strong coffee, reviewing the day's agenda. Her home office was lined with framed photographs, her parents, her first day as a bank teller, the ribbon-cutting ceremony for Umoja's flagship branch. Each image was a reminder of the journey that brought her here. A childhood in Atlanta, lessons in resilience from her mother, and the relentless drive that pushed her through every closed door. Today, she felt a quiet satisfaction. Umoja Bank was thriving, and she was scheduled to visit the branch she'd personally overseen during its expansion. For Thandiwe, these visits were more than routine. They were a chance to connect with the community, to see the impact of her work firsthand. Stepping outside, Thandiwe was greeted by the cool embrace of autumn. The city was alive with color. Leaves in shades of gold and crimson lined the sidewalks, and the air carried a hint of wood smoke. Atlanta's skyline shimmered in the early light, a testament to progress and possibility. As her driver navigated the familiar streets, Thandiwe gazed out the window, reflecting on how far she'd come. She remembered the skepticism she faced as a young black woman in finance, the countless times her ideas were dismissed before they were even heard. Yet, here she was, leading an institution that had become a lifeline for so many. Umoja wasn't just a bank, it was a promise kept. The car pulled up to the branch, its glass facade gleaming in the morning sun. Thandiwe stepped out, her posture straight, her expression calm but alert. She wore a tailored navy suit, sharp lines, subtle gold accents, a blend of authority and approachability. Every detail was intentional, from her polished shoes to the pin on her lapel bearing Umoja's emblem. As she approached the entrance, staff inside caught sight of her and straightened their name tags, eager to make a good impression. Customers in the lobby glanced up, some recognizing her immediately, others sensing her importance by the way she carried herself. Walking through the doors, Thandiwe felt a surge of pride. This branch was more than bricks and mortar. It was the realization of a vision born years ago in her parents' living room. She remembered the early days. Long hours, limited resources, and the constant pressure to prove herself. There were setbacks, but each one only strengthened her resolve. Umoja's mission was clear: to serve those who had been overlooked, to create opportunities where none existed before. Every smiling face in the lobby, every handshake from a grateful customer, was proof that her efforts mattered. As Thandiwe made her way to the counter, she exchanged greetings with staff and customers alike. There was warmth in the air, a sense of belonging that she cherished. Yet, beneath her calm exterior, she remained vigilant. Years of experience had taught her that even in spaces she'd built, challenges could arise without warning. She glanced at the teller counter, noticing a new face among the staff. A brief flicker of uncertainty crossed her mind, but she brushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. Today was meant to be routine. A simple withdrawal, a few words of encouragement to her team, and a reminder of why she started this journey. What Thandiwe didn't know was that this ordinary morning would soon test everything she believed about leadership, respect, and the true meaning of community. Thandiwe approached the counter with a confident smile, her steps measured and assured. The teller, a young man with a crisp shirt and a name tag that read Calvin Roberts, looked up from his screen. For a moment, his eyes widened, as if he recognized her, but the expression faded quickly. Thandiwe greeted him warmly. "Good morning. I'd like to make a withdrawal from my personal account." She slid her identification across the counter, expecting the usual efficiency she'd come to associate with her staff. Calvin glanced at the ID, then at Thandiwe, his face unreadable. "I'll need to see additional documentation," he said, his tone flat. Thandiwe blinked, caught off guard. "I'm sorry, is there a problem with my account?" He shook his head, not meeting her gaze. "It's just policy. For withdrawals of this size, we require more than just an ID." She kept her voice steady. "I understand the need for security. I'm the account holder, and I'm also the CEO of this bank. If you need to verify anything, I'm happy to answer your questions." Calvin's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm following procedure. I'll need to see proof of address and a second form of identification." A wave of disbelief washed over Thandiwe. She had completed this transaction countless times, both as a customer and as the leader of the institution. Was this really happening? She felt a familiar heat rising in her chest, a mix of anger and sadness. This wasn't about paperwork. It was about something deeper, something she'd faced her entire career. She took a slow breath, steadying herself. "I can provide whatever you need, but I'd like to understand why this is necessary today. My information should be up to date in your system." Calvin's eyes flicked to the line forming behind her. "It's just the rules. I don't make them." The lobby grew quieter. Customers shifted in their seats, sensing the tension. A few staff members glanced over, their faces tight with concern. Thandiwe felt the weight of every eye in the room. She was no longer just a leader. She was on display, her authority questioned in front of her own community. She tried again, her voice calm but firm. "Calvin, I appreciate your diligence. But I assure you, my credentials are in order. If you'd like, you can call the branch manager to confirm." He didn't budge. "I can't process this without the required documents. If you don't have them, you'll need to come back another day." The words stung. Thandiwe's hands tightened around her purse. She could feel the humiliation settling in, cold and heavy. She glanced at the faces in the lobby, some sympathetic, others curious, a few whispering quietly. The sense of isolation was sharp. Here she was, in the very place she'd built to be a refuge, being treated like an outsider. As she stood there, memories surfaced, moments she'd tried to leave behind. The boardroom where her ideas were dismissed until repeated by someone else. The networking event where she was mistaken for support staff. The countless times her expertise was questioned, her presence doubted, her authority undermined. Each memory pressed in, making the present moment even more painful. She remembered her mother's words. "You'll have to work twice as hard for half the recognition." Thandiwe had always believed that excellence would shield her from these slights, that her achievements would speak for themselves. But here, in front of her own staff and customers, she was reminded that some barriers were stubborn, refusing to fall no matter how high she climbed. Thandiwe straightened her shoulders. "Calvin, I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking to be treated fairly. If there's a new policy, I'd like to see it in writing. Otherwise, I expect the same service as any other customer." Calvin's jaw tightened. "I'm not authorized to make exceptions." A woman in line behind Thandiwe spoke up, her voice gentle but clear. "She's the CEO. Everyone knows her. Why are you making this so difficult?" Calvin ignored the comment, focusing on his computer screen. "I'm just doing my job." Thandiwe's patience was wearing thin. She leaned in, her tone low but resolute. "Doing your job means treating every customer with respect. I expect nothing less." The branch manager, Terrell Hayes, appeared at the edge of the lobby, drawn by the growing tension. He watched the exchange, his expression troubled. Staff members exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to intervene. The atmosphere was thick with discomfort. Thandiwe felt exposed, her authority chipped away with every passing second. She wondered how many others had faced similar treatment, how many had walked away, silent and unseen. The pain was not just personal, it was collective, a reminder of the work still left to do. Inside, Thandiwe's resolve hardened. She would not let this moment define her, but she would not ignore it either. The humiliation was real, but so was her determination. She glanced at Terrell, silently urging him to step in, to recognize the injustice unfolding in plain sight. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. Calvin continued to shuffle papers, refusing to look up. Thandiwe stood her ground, refusing to shrink. She would not be erased, not here, not today. If you've ever felt invisible in a place you helped build, hit the like button. Your story matters, and you're not alone. As the confrontation at the counter unfolded, a hush settled over the branch. Conversations faded, replaced by the soft shuffle of feet and the low hum of the air conditioning. Customers who had been chatting moments before now exchanged uneasy glances, their attention drawn to the standoff at the front. Some recognized Thandiwe immediately, their eyes widening in disbelief. Others, unfamiliar with her story, sensed the gravity of the moment from the tension in the air. A mother with her young son clutched his hand a little tighter, whispering quietly as she watched. An older man in a faded cap shook his head, his expression a mix of sympathy and frustration. Even those who didn't know the details could feel that something important was happening. Something that went beyond a simple banking request. Behind the counter, staff members shifted nervously. A young teller named Jasmine glanced at her supervisor, her brow furrowed with concern. She had always admired Thandiwe, seeing her as a role model and a symbol of what was possible. Now, watching her face this public challenge, Jasmine felt a mix of anger and helplessness. She wanted to speak up, to defend the woman who had inspired her, but uncertainty held her back. Other employees exchanged worried looks, their hands hovering over keyboards, unsure whether to continue their work or step in. The usual rhythm of the branch was broken. Every eye was drawn to the counter, every ear tuned to the unfolding exchange. The sense of unity that usually filled the space was replaced by a collective unease. In his office, Terrell Hayes watched the scene through the glass wall. He felt a knot forming in his stomach. As branch manager, he was responsible for upholding the bank's values, but he was also aware of the delicate balance between supporting his staff and protecting the institution's reputation. Terrell respected Thandiwe deeply. Her leadership had given him opportunities he never thought possible. Yet, he hesitated, torn between loyalty to his team and the clear injustice playing out before him. He replayed the conversation in his mind, searching for a way to de-escalate the situation without undermining his authority or embarrassing his staff. But as the minutes ticked by, it became clear that silence would only make things worse. The longer he waited, the more the tension grew, and the more the branch's sense of community began to fray. The atmosphere in the lobby shifted. Customers began to murmur, their voices growing louder as frustration and disbelief spread. A woman near the back of the line spoke up, her words carrying across the room. Why is she being treated this way? Isn't she the one who started this bank? Her question hung in the air, echoing the thoughts of many. Others nodded in agreement, their support for Thandiwe growing stronger with each passing second. The incident was no longer just about a withdrawal. It had become a test of the bank's values, a moment that would be remembered by everyone present. The community, once silent, was finding its voice. Realizing the stakes, Terrell took a steadying breath and left his office. He walked toward the counter, his steps purposeful. The staff parted as he approached, their faces a mix of relief and anxiety. Terrell addressed Calvin quietly, his tone firm but controlled. "Let's step aside and discuss this," he said, signaling that the situation required immediate attention. As Terrell led Calvin away, the tension in the room began to ease, replaced by a sense of anticipation. Customers watched closely, waiting to see how the bank's leadership would respond. For many, this was more than a policy dispute. It was a reflection of whether their trust in Umoja Bank was justified. In that moment, the branch was united by a shared understanding. What happened at the counter mattered to everyone. It was about dignity, respect, and the promise that Umoja Bank had made to its community. The outcome would set a precedent, not just for the staff, but for every customer who walked through those doors. The ripple effect was undeniable. A single act of bias had sparked a collective response, reminding everyone that true community is built not just on words, but on actions, especially when it matters most. Terrell's heart pounded as he led Calvin into his office, closing the door behind them. The glass walls offered little privacy, but the urgency of the moment left no room for hesitation. Terrell's voice was low but unwavering. "Calvin, I need you to explain your decision at the counter. Why did you refuse the transaction for Ms. Mackay's?" Calvin shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the floor. "I was just following procedure. She didn't have the extra documents I asked for." Terrell pressed further. "Did you check her profile? Did you recognize who she is, not just as a customer, but as the founder of this institution?" Calvin hesitated, then shook his head. "I didn't think it mattered. I was just doing what I thought was right." Terrell's disappointment was clear. "Our policies are meant to protect, not to exclude. You had all the information you needed. This wasn't about security. It was about respect." Without delay, Terrell called in the assistant manager and the head of HR. The three reviewed the security footage and transaction logs, confirming that Thandiwe's credentials were in perfect order. There was no legitimate reason for the denial. The evidence was clear. Calvin's actions had crossed a line, undermining the very values Umoja Bank stood for. Terrell knew what had to be done. The decision was not made lightly, but the integrity of the institution and the trust of its community depended on swift, decisive action. He called Calvin back into the office, his tone measured but resolute. "Calvin, your conduct this morning does not reflect the standards we uphold. Effective immediately, your employment with Umoja Bank is terminated." Calvin's face fell, a mix of shock and regret flickering across his features. He gathered his belongings in silence, escorted by HR. The news spread quickly through the branch, carried in hushed voices and exchanged glances. Terrell returned to the lobby, his expression somber. He addressed the staff and customers with clarity. "I want to assure everyone here that Umoja Bank does not tolerate disrespect or discrimination in any form. The situation at the counter has been addressed, and steps are being taken to ensure it never happens again." The words carried weight. Staff members straightened, some visibly relieved. Customers nodded, their faith in the institution momentarily restored. The sense of tension that had gripped the branch began to lift, replaced by a cautious optimism. Thandiwe stood quietly near the entrance, her composure intact but her emotions swirling beneath the surface. The sting of the morning's humiliation lingered, but so did a sense of vindication. She had not been silenced. The bank she built had chosen to stand with her, not just in words, but in action. She exchanged a brief, grateful nod with Terrell. Their eyes met, and in that silent moment, a world of understanding passed between them. Both knew that this day would be remembered, not for the mistake, but for the response. Jasmine, the young teller, felt a surge of pride. She had watched the events unfold with growing anxiety, fearing that nothing would change. Now, seeing leadership act so quickly, she felt hope. Other staff members gathered in small groups, discussing the outcome. Some were surprised by the speed of the decision, but most agreed it was necessary. Customers lingered in the lobby, sharing their thoughts in low voices. An older woman approached Thandiwe, offering a quiet word of support. "Thank you for standing up for all of us," she said. Others echoed her sentiment, expressing relief that the bank had chosen accountability over silence. The events of those 7 minutes became more than just a story about a denied withdrawal. They became a symbol of what true leadership looks like, leadership that does not hide behind bureaucracy, but faces injustice head-on. The swift response sent a message to everyone present. Respect is not negotiable, and accountability is not optional. For Thandiwe, the experience was bittersweet. The pain of being questioned in her own institution would not fade quickly, but the knowledge that her team acted with integrity offered a measure of healing. For the staff, it was a lesson in courage and responsibility. For the community, it was proof that Umoja Bank was willing to live up to its promise. In just 7 minutes, a single act of bias was met with decisive action. The branch, once filled with tension, now stood as a testament to the power of immediate accountability, a reminder that change is possible when leaders refuse to look away. After the branch returned to its usual rhythm, Thandiwe retreated to her office, closing the door softly behind her. The quiet was a stark contrast to the tension that had filled the lobby just moments before. She sat at her desk, hands folded, eyes fixed on the city skyline beyond the window. The morning's events replayed in her mind, each detail sharp and unyielding. The humiliation she felt at the counter was not new, but it cut deeper because it happened in a place she had built with her own hands. She let herself feel the weight of it, the sting of being doubted, the ache of being made to prove herself yet again. Alone, she allowed the mask of composure to slip, her shoulders sagging under the burden of disappointment. She thought of the countless times she had faced similar moments, each one leaving a mark that never quite faded. Her thoughts drifted back to her childhood. She remembered her mother's gentle voice, telling stories of perseverance and hope during long evenings in their modest home. Her father's quiet strength, his insistence that dignity was not something given, but something claimed. Thandiwe's journey had always been uphill, navigating spaces where she was often the only black woman in the room, where her ideas were met with skepticism, where her presence was questioned before her words were even heard. She recalled her first job in banking, the way colleagues would overlook her in meetings, the subtle slights that accumulated over time. There were days when she wondered if her efforts would ever be enough, if the doors she opened would stay open for those who came after her. Each setback, each moment of doubt, had shaped her into the leader she was now, resilient, determined, and unwilling to accept less than what she deserved. Being a black woman in power came with a unique set of challenges. Thandiwe carried not only her own ambitions, but also the hopes of her family, her community, and every young person who looked to her as proof that success was possible. The responsibility was immense. Every decision she made, every action she took, was scrutinized more closely, judged more harshly. She knew that her mistakes would not be seen as individual missteps, but as evidence against all who looked like her. The morning's incident was a reminder of how quickly respect could be withdrawn, how easily authority could be questioned. It was exhausting, this constant need to prove herself, to defend her right to lead. Yet, even in her lowest moments, Thandiwe refused to let bitterness take root. She reminded herself that her presence in these spaces was itself an act of defiance, a statement that she belonged, no matter who tried to say otherwise. Thandiwe's thoughts returned to her parents, to the sacrifices they made so she could have opportunities they never dreamed of. She remembered her mother's words, "You are the answer to someone's prayer." That legacy was both a comfort and a challenge. It meant she could not afford to give up, no matter how heavy the burden became. She thought of the young women who worked at Umoja, the customers who saw themselves reflected in her story. Their faith in her was a source of strength. She knew that every time she stood her ground, she was making it easier for the next person to do the same. The pain she felt was not just her own. It was shared by everyone who had ever been made to feel small in a place they helped build. As the sun climbed higher, Thandiwe straightened in her chair. She wiped away a stray tear, her resolve hardening. This moment would not define her. Instead, it would fuel her commitment to change. She would use her voice, her position, and her influence to ensure that what happened today would not be repeated. The reforms she had already begun at Umoja would be strengthened. Training would be expanded, feedback welcomed, and every employee reminded of the values that set the bank apart. Thandiwe opened her journal and began to write, capturing her thoughts while they were still raw. She wrote about the pain, but also about the hope that came from seeing her team respond with integrity. She wrote about the importance of accountability and the need to keep pushing for progress, even when the path was difficult. By the time she finished, Thandiwe felt lighter. The scars of the morning would remain, but they would not hold her back. She stood, smoothed her suit, and prepared to face the rest of the day. There was work to be done, and she was ready to lead, not in spite of what had happened, but because of it. By late morning, the executive floor of Umoja Bank was buzzing with urgency. Senior leaders gathered in the boardroom, summoned by a single message: emergency meeting, immediate attendance required. The room filled quickly, the air thick with concern. Some board members arrived with questions, others with opinions, all aware that the morning's incident had already begun to ripple far beyond the branch. Thandiwe entered last, her presence commanding attention. She took her seat at the head of the table, her expression calm but resolute. The meeting began with a review of the facts, what had happened, how quickly it had escalated, and the steps already taken. The board listened intently, some nodding in agreement, others shifting uneasily in their seats. Debate erupted almost immediately. One director worried about the bank's reputation, fearing that the story would be twisted by outsiders. Another argued that the swift termination of Calvin was necessary, but wondered if it would be enough to reassure the public. A third voiced concern for staff morale, questioning how the team would recover from such a public ordeal. The conversation moved quickly, emotions running high as each person weighed the risks and responsibilities. Yet, amid the uncertainty, there was also support. Several board members praised the decisive action, insisting that Umoja's values must be upheld, no matter the cost. They spoke of the bank's mission, its promise to the community, and the importance of standing by those principles even when it was uncomfortable. When the debate reached a lull, Thandiwe stood. She looked around the table, meeting each person's gaze. Her voice was steady, but every word carried conviction. "We are not just a financial institution," she began. "We are a promise to our community, a promise that everyone who walks through our doors will be treated with dignity and respect. What happened this morning was a violation of that promise. It was not just a mistake, it was a breach of trust." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "Our response must be more than a press release or a single termination. We need to look at our training, our culture, and our systems. We must ask ourselves hard questions. Are we truly living up to our values? Are we creating an environment where every employee understands what respect looks like in practice?" Thandiwe outlined her vision for reform: comprehensive training on cultural sensitivity, regular reviews of customer interactions, and a new feedback system that would allow both staff and customers to report concerns without fear. She called for transparency, accountability, and a renewed commitment to the bank's founding mission. Her speech was met with a mix of relief and resolve. The board agreed. Change was not just necessary, it was urgent. News of the incident spread rapidly. By midday, local news stations were running segments about the CEO denied service at her own bank. Headlines flashed across television screens and news sites. Black CEO turned away at her own bank. Swift action follows. The story was picked up by national outlets, each adding their own analysis and commentary. Journalists reached out for statements, eager to understand how such an event could happen in a bank known for its commitment to inclusion. Thandiwe agreed to a live interview, determined to address the issue head-on. She spoke with clarity and honesty, refusing to downplay the pain of the experience but emphasizing the bank's swift response and plans for reform. Social media platforms lit up with discussion. Hashtags supporting Thandiwe and Umoja Bank began trending. Customers shared their own stories of bias and resilience, while others debated the effectiveness of immediate termination as a solution. Influencers and community leaders weighed in, some praising the bank's transparency, others calling for even deeper changes. The public response was intense and complex. Many applauded Umoja Bank for acting quickly and holding staff accountable. Messages of support poured in from across the country. Emails, phone calls, and social media posts expressing solidarity with Thandiwe and her team. Community organizations offered to partner with the bank on future initiatives, seeing an opportunity to drive broader change. Yet, not all feedback was positive. Some critics questioned whether the bank's actions were enough, or if they were simply a reaction to public pressure. Others wondered how such an incident could happen in the first place, raising doubts about the depth of Umoja's commitment to its values. The scrutiny was relentless, every detail dissected and discussed in public forums. Thandiwe felt the weight of both the praise and the criticism. She knew that true leadership meant facing hard questions, even when the answers were uncomfortable. She welcomed the dialogue, seeing it as a chance to learn, to grow, and to prove that Umoja Bank was serious about change. By the end of the day, the board had approved Thandiwe's proposed reforms. The story continued to dominate headlines, but the narrative was shifting from one of failure to one of accountability and hope. Thandiwe's leadership, tested in the public eye, had set a new standard for what it meant to respond to injustice with courage and clarity. As news of the incident continued to spread, the community surrounding Umoja Bank sprang into action. Local organizations quickly organized forums, inviting residents, customers, and staff to share their thoughts and experiences. These gatherings were filled with passionate voices, some angry, some hopeful, all determined to be heard. The conversations were honest and sometimes raw, as people recounted moments when they, too, had felt dismissed or overlooked in places meant to serve them. Online, the response was just as powerful. Hashtags like #RespectAtUmoja and #BankingOnChange began trending, uniting people from different backgrounds in a shared call for justice. Social media became a space for solidarity, with users posting messages of support for Thandiwe and sharing their own stories of bias in financial institutions. The digital movement grew rapidly, drawing attention from activists, journalists, and even public officials. At one community forum, a longtime customer stood up and spoke about her first experience at Umoja Bank. She described how, years ago, she had walked in feeling nervous and uncertain, only to be greeted with warmth and respect. "That's why this place matters," she said, her voice steady. "It's supposed to be different. We can't let one moment undo all the good that's been built here." Another attendee, a young activist, shared his frustration with the slow pace of change in the banking industry. He recounted stories from friends and family who had faced similar obstacles at other institutions, extra paperwork, suspicious glances, and unexplained delays. This isn't just about one branch or one employee, he insisted. It's about a system that needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. Stories poured in from across the city. Some were shared in person, others posted online. A small business owner described how Umoja had helped her secure a loan when no other bank would listen. A college student tweeted about the pride he felt seeing someone who looked like him leading a major institution. Each story added another layer to the conversation, reminding everyone that the fight for respect and fairness was ongoing. Community leaders saw an opportunity to push for broader reforms. Advocacy groups began meeting with bank executives, offering to help design new training programs and accountability measures. They called for regular listening sessions where customers and staff could voice concerns directly to leadership. Petitions circulated, demanding that all financial institutions adopt clear policies against discrimination and provide transparent reporting on their progress. Local media covered these efforts closely, highlighting the determination of residents to hold their bank and the industry as a whole to a higher standard. Editorials praised Umoja's willingness to engage with the community, but also urged continued vigilance. Change doesn't happen overnight, one columnist wrote. It takes commitment, transparency, and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. The incident at Umoja Bank quickly caught the attention of scholars and industry experts. A professor of sociology at a nearby university was invited to speak at a televised panel. She explained that what happened to Thandiwe was not an isolated event, but part of a larger pattern seen in many sectors. When institutions respond quickly and transparently, it can set a new precedent, she said. But real progress requires ongoing effort, policies, training, and a willingness to listen to those most affected. Financial analysts weighed in as well, noting that public trust in banks is fragile and must be earned every day. Some pointed to Umoja's response as a model for others, while cautioning that true reform would require more than a single act of accountability. This is a moment for the entire industry to reflect, one expert remarked. It's a chance to move beyond statements and take meaningful action. As the days passed, the conversation shifted from outrage to action. Community members and advocates pressed for industry-wide reforms, arguing that every bank should be held to the same high standards. They called for mandatory training on cultural awareness, regular audits of customer service practices, and the creation of independent oversight committees. Umoja Bank responded by announcing a series of new initiatives. Staff would undergo comprehensive training, and a new feedback system would allow customers to report concerns anonymously. The bank also pledged to work with community partners to develop mentorship programs for young people interested in finance, hoping to inspire the next generation of leaders. Other banks in the region took notice. Some began reviewing their own policies, while others reached out to Umoja for guidance. The incident had sparked a movement, one that extended far beyond a single branch or city. It was a call to action for the entire industry, a reminder that respect, fairness, and accountability must be at the heart of every institution. In the weeks that followed, Umoja Bank's branches saw an increase in new customers, many drawn by the bank's commitment to transparency and reform. Community forums continued, with leaders and residents working together to ensure that progress would not stall. The story of Thandiwe's experience became a rallying point, a symbol of what can happen when a community refuses to accept the status quo. The push for systemic reform was far from over, but the momentum was undeniable. Umoja Bank, once at the center of controversy, now stood as a beacon for what was possible when people came together to demand better, not just for themselves, but for everyone. In the aftermath of the incident, Thandiwe wasted no time. She called her executive team together and outlined a plan that would reshape the bank's culture from the inside out. The first step was a comprehensive training program for every employee, from tellers to senior management. The sessions focused on cultural awareness, empathy, and the importance of treating every customer with dignity. Trainers used real scenarios, including the recent event, to spark honest conversations and challenge assumptions. Thandiwe insisted that this training would not be a one-time event. Instead, it would become a regular part of staff development, with ongoing workshops and refreshers. Employees were encouraged to share their own experiences and ask difficult questions. The goal was not just to prevent future incidents, but to build a team that truly understood the values Umoja Bank stood for. Recognizing that change required more than internal training, Thandiwe introduced a new feedback system. Customers could now submit their experiences, positive or negative, through an anonymous online portal or in-branch kiosks. Every submission was reviewed by a dedicated team, and patterns were tracked to identify areas needing improvement. This system was more than a suggestion box. It was a direct line between the community and the bank's leadership. Thandiwe made it clear that every voice mattered. She personally read many of the comments, using them to guide policy changes and staff recognition. When a customer praised an employee for exceptional service, that staff member was celebrated. When a concern was raised, it was addressed quickly and transparently. Thandiwe also saw an opportunity to invest in the future. She launched a mentorship initiative aimed at young people from underrepresented backgrounds who were interested in finance. The program paired students with experienced professionals at Umoja Bank, offering guidance, internships, and networking opportunities. Workshops were held at local schools and community centers, where Thandiwe and her team spoke about their own journeys and the importance of perseverance. The mentorship program quickly gained traction, with dozens of students signing up in the first month. For many, it was their first real exposure to the world of banking, a world that now felt more accessible and welcoming. To keep the lines of communication open, Umoja Bank began hosting regular town hall meetings. These gatherings brought together staff, customers, and community leaders in an open forum. Thandiwe attended every session, listening carefully to feedback and answering questions directly. At one meeting, a customer shared how she had once felt intimidated walking into a bank, but her experience at Umoja had changed her perspective. Another spoke about the pride he felt seeing his community represented in leadership. These stories reinforced the importance of the reforms and inspired the team to keep pushing forward. Staff members also shared their perspectives. Some admitted that the recent incident had been a wake-up call, prompting them to reflect on their own actions and attitudes. Others expressed gratitude for the chance to learn and grow in a supportive environment. The meetings became a cornerstone of Umoja's new culture, one built on openness, accountability, and mutual respect. As the weeks passed, the changes at Umoja Bank became visible. Employees greeted customers with renewed warmth, and the atmosphere in each branch felt more welcoming. The feedback system led to small but meaningful adjustments, clearer signage, more accessible services, and a greater emphasis on personal connection. Thandiwe made it a point to recognize progress, both big and small. She celebrated milestones with her team, highlighting stories of growth and resilience. The bank's reputation began to recover, not just because of the reforms, but because customers could see and feel the difference. Word of Umoja's transformation spread quickly. Other banks in the region took notice, reaching out to Thandiwe for advice on implementing similar programs. Industry conferences invited her to speak about the importance of cultural awareness and community engagement. Articles appeared in business journals, describing Umoja's journey from crisis to renewal. Some competitors began their own reviews, launching training and feedback systems inspired by Umoja's example. Community organizations used Umoja as a case study, showing what was possible when leadership responded to adversity with action instead of excuses. Thandiwe's approach became a blueprint for change, not just in banking, but in other industries as well. Nonprofits, schools, and even city agencies contacted Umoja for guidance on building more inclusive environments. The story of one morning's pain had become a catalyst for progress across the city and beyond. Through it all, Thandiwe remained focused on the mission. She knew that real change required constant effort and vigilance. The reforms were not a finish line, but a foundation for ongoing growth. Umoja Bank's journey was far from over, but the culture of accountability and respect was now deeply rooted. For Thandiwe, every step forward was a tribute to those who had come before her, and a promise to those who would follow. The pain of that morning had been transformed into progress, setting a new standard for what a community bank could and should be. In the quiet of her home office, Thandiwe found space to process everything that had unfolded. The days were busy, but she carved out time each evening to sit with her journal, letting her thoughts flow freely onto the page. She wrote about the pain of being doubted, the anger that surfaced in moments of injustice, and the pride she felt watching her team rise to the challenge. Writing became a form of release, a way to make sense of the chaos and to chart a path forward. Sometimes, she turned to creative expression, sketching scenes from her childhood or composing short reflections inspired by her mother's wisdom. These moments of solitude helped her heal, reminding her that growth often comes from the most difficult experiences. Thandiwe understood that leadership was not just about public victories, but also about private resilience. As the story of Umoja Bank's transformation spread, Thandiwe's journey became a source of inspiration for many. Young professionals reached out, sharing how her example gave them courage to pursue their own ambitions. Community members spoke of the pride they felt seeing someone from their neighborhood lead with such integrity. Thandiwe received letters from students, entrepreneurs, and even strangers from other cities. Some wrote about their own struggles with bias and exclusion, while others simply thanked her for showing what was possible. She realized that her story was no longer just her own. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong, everyone who had ever been made to feel small. Her presence at Umoja Bank became more than a symbol of success. It was a reminder that change is possible, even in the face of adversity. Thandiwe embraced this role, knowing that her visibility could open doors for others. She made time to mentor young women, sharing lessons learned and encouraging them to stand firm in their convictions. The events at Umoja Bank quickly became a topic of discussion far beyond Atlanta. Business schools used the story as a case study in ethical leadership and crisis management. Professors assigned it to students, challenging them to think critically about accountability and the responsibilities of those in power. Thandiwe was invited to speak at conferences, where she shared her perspective on building inclusive organizations and responding to setbacks with action. Her talks resonated with audiences, sparking conversations about the importance of empathy, transparency, and community engagement. National media outlets continued to cover the story, highlighting the reforms at Umoja and the broader movement for equity in banking. Editorials praised Thandiwe's approach, noting that her willingness to confront uncomfortable truths had set a new standard for the industry. The dialogue extended to other sectors, with leaders in education, healthcare, and government reflecting on how they could apply similar principles in their own work. Through it all, Thandiwe remained grounded. She knew that recognition was not the goal, lasting change was. The journey had been difficult, but it had also been transformative. She saw the impact not just in headlines or awards, but in the everyday interactions at Umoja Bank. A teller greeting a customer with genuine warmth, a manager listening carefully to feedback, a young intern realizing that their voice mattered. Thandiwe's story became a touchstone for those seeking to create more just and compassionate institutions. Her willingness to turn pain into progress inspired others to do the same, proving that even the hardest moments can lead to growth and hope. 3 months after the incident, the community gathered in a sunlit hall to honor Thandiwe's leadership. The event was filled with familiar faces, colleagues, customers, local leaders, and young people who had found inspiration in her story. The atmosphere was one of gratitude and quiet pride. Banners bearing Umoja Bank's emblem hung from the walls, and the sound of applause echoed as Thandiwe took the stage. She accepted the award with humility, her eyes scanning the crowd. For a moment she paused, taking in the faces of those who had supported her through every challenge. The recognition was meaningful, but what mattered most to Thandiwe was the sense of unity in the room, a shared belief in the possibility of change. When Thandiwe spoke, her words carried the weight of experience and the promise of a brighter future. We are here today not just to celebrate one person, but to honor the spirit of accountability that lives in all of us, she began. True progress is not measured by titles or awards, but by the courage to do what is right, even when it is difficult. She spoke about the morning that tested her resolve, the pain of being doubted, and the strength she found in her community's response. Thandiwe reminded everyone that accountability is not about punishment, but about learning, growing, and building trust. Every time we choose to stand up for justice, we create a ripple that reaches far beyond ourselves, she said. Hope is not passive. It is built through action, through every decision to treat others with respect. Her message was clear. The journey toward fairness and dignity is ongoing, and it requires everyone's participation. Thandiwe encouraged the audience to look for opportunities to lead with integrity, to listen with empathy, and to never underestimate the impact of a single act of courage. As the ceremony drew to a close, Thandiwe reflected on the legacy she hoped to leave behind. She wanted Umoja Bank to be remembered not just for its services, but for its commitment to justice and inclusion. She hoped that her story would inspire others to challenge injustice wherever they found it, and to believe that change is possible even when the odds seem insurmountable. The applause that followed was not just for Thandiwe, but for everyone who had played a part in the journey. The lesson was simple but powerful. Every act of courage, no matter how small, plants seeds for a better future. If you believe in standing up for justice, subscribe and join our community. Together, we can make a difference, one story, one action, one voice at a time. Today's story is more than a headline. It's a reminder of what can happen when one person refuses to accept injustice. Thandiwe's experience at her own bank was painful, but it became a turning point. Her courage and the community's response showed that real change is possible when people stand together and demand better. The lesson is clear. Respect and fairness are not privileges. They are rights that must be protected and defended every single day. If you've ever felt overlooked, doubted, or made to feel like you didn't belong, know that your story matters. This channel is a space for voices that deserve to be heard. By sharing your experiences, you help others find strength and hope. Let's support one another, learn from each other, and keep pushing for a world where everyone is treated with dignity. Your voice can inspire someone else to speak up. Your story can help someone else heal. Together, we can build a community that stands for justice, empathy, and progress. Comment below with your thoughts, share this video, and let's keep the conversation going. If you haven't already, subscribe to Echoes of Grace for more stories that challenge, uplift, and unite us all.